His military analysts have shown that were there a conventional war with NATO, NATO would win.
Well, let us talk to Admiral Lord West, who's a former head of the Royal Navy and a former security minister. Welcome to you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
So tell me, what about this latest remark from Vladimir Putin? I mean, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, for example, we used to hear, every now and again, a bit of sort of nuclear saber rattling from Russia, and it caused a lot of comment and a certain amount of alarm. Now it seems to be happening almost every week.
Yeah, I mean, he's done that a number of times now, and he seems to be doing it more often. And it's very difficult to ascertain where he's going with this, what he's trying to achieve. I mean, to make claims about are nuclear weapons more modern than the American ones shows a sort of lack of understanding about the full horror of nuclear war, to be quite honest. The American systems are well capable of doing all the things they need to do. Admittedly, Putin has been spending a rather lot of money on upgrading and producing extraordinary weapons that almost seem to be for Armageddon. I mean, there's great underwater torpedo that would go into the shallow water on the west coast of the States and explode and put an immense cloud of radioactive material in there. You do wonder where he's coming from on this, but I think mentioning it now is he is worried, I think, by the fact that probably his military analysts have shown that were there a conventional war with NATO, NATO would win.
Yeah.
And he is concerned about that. And he wants to make us uncertain, keep making this threat. The danger is that things can happen by miscalculation, and it is extraordinarily dangerous to just keep throwing around this threat of I'll use a nuclear weapon as if this is nothing particularly amazing to use one. I mean, it's a most extraordinary step to take to suddenly go across that nuclear threshold. And I think it does show, I'm afraid it shows what a sort of person he is. I have no doubt whatsoever, for example, that if the West didn't have nuclear weapons, that he would use one to actually get his will. I have no doubt about it. And it shows what a sort of ruthless and bloodthirsty sort of person he is, really. I mean, it's quite extraordinary.
Well, certainly the volume of the saber rattling has got louder. I think today he was saying that nuclear weapons are for using, whereas I thought the purpose of deterrence was to have nuclear weapons so you never have to use them.
Well, he's always had this scheme. He calls it his policy of de-escalation. And he said this some years ago. If he was in a war with NATO and NATO started to win, he would fire a nuclear weapon to de-escalate the conflict. He doesn't realize that if you fire a nuclear weapon at NATO, that doesn't de-escalate the conflict. So it shows a complete lack of understanding. And similarly, he is rattled because he had this adventure in Ukraine, which he thought would take a matter of days. It hasn't. It's been a long, grinding war, which has made his military suffer quite a lot. And NATO, which he thought would get weaker and weaker because it was a weak sort of organization, has got stronger. And having actually taken in Sweden and Finland, that is that rattles him. The Finns understand the Russians. They've done very well in the odd fight against them historically. They're a tough nation. And both the Finns and the Swedes have highly capable military. And so NATO is considerably stronger and more unified than it was when this war started.
Yes. What about support for Ukraine, though? I mean, is Ukraine, do you think, being let down by its friends and allies? These reports of Ukrainian ammunition running short on the front line, that's worrying.
It is extremely worrying. And I have to say, I don't think EU nations to get all together have done particularly well on this, and certainly one has great difficulty in negotiations with the Germans about exactly what they're going to be doing in terms of providing the Taurus missiles. We use Storm Shadow. There was some talk about a sort of circular, funny arrangement where we would take some Taurus from the Germans and give more Storm Shadow to Ukraine, but basically, when there needs to be more support, there's got to be more support for Ukraine. What we don't want is a slow grinding war in Ukraine to be ground down and to lose this war. Losing this war would be a disaster, really, for all of us in the West.
Now, let's talk for a moment about Britain's future relationships. There are suggestions today that the Labour Party, who obviously hope to be in government after the next general election, are contemplating closer security ties with the European Union. Would that be a good idea? Should the government be thinking the same thing?
Well, I do it in two. I talk about it in two ways here. Well, our closest tie in security and military ties with the EU are NATO. And most of those countries, or a large number of those countries, are NATO countries. And NATO is an organization that is up and running. It has funding, it has a proper command structure, and it can really do things, and it has an ability to take decisions and take action. The EU has shown so far that it has very little capability of doing that. And if money is taken away from NATO forces and forces that can be deployed by NATO to form this strange EU sort of alliance, then I think that is a mistake. And I don't think we should be involved in something like that. But yes, of course, we should be close to our friends and allies in Europe. And, although we've withdrawn from the EU, links with countries like the Dutch, where we have a combined amphibious force, with the French, where we do a lot of combined type work, with other nations, the Norwegians, who we work very closely with. Yes, of course we've got to work with them all, but I don't think we want an EU structure, an EU defence force, which I know that President Macron wants, but I think he wants it for all the wrong reasons.
Right. Admiral Lord West, good to talk to you as always. Thank you.
President Vladimir Putin says Russia is technically ready for nuclear war. In the warning to the West, which came on Wednesday, he added that if the US sent troops to Ukraine or Russian territory, it would be deemed as a significant escalation of the conflict. Here's Putin speaking to state media Russia 1, just days before elections which are sure to hand him another 6 years in power.
Are we really ready for nuclear war?
Firstly, from the technical point of view, of course we are ready. They are consistently combat ready. Secondly, and this is accepted by everybody, our nuclear triad is more modern than any other triad. Actually, only us and Americans have a triad, and we have advanced much more than them. Our triad and the whole nuclear element is more modern.
Putin's nuclear warning came alongside another offer for talks on Ukraine as part of a new post-Cold War demarcation of European security. The US, however, says Putin is not ready for serious talks on the conflict. Putin has made several public nuclear warnings to the US aimed at discouraging greater involvement in Ukraine, a move the Kremlin says would mark a slide into World War. Despite Washington claiming it has seen no major changes to Russia's nuclear position, the remarks have certainly caused concern in the US capital. The West continues to grapple with how to support Kyiv against Russia, which now controls almost a fifth of Ukrainian territory. Kyiv says it's defending itself against an imperial-style war of conquest, designed to erase its national identity, whereas Russia says the areas it controls in Ukraine now belong to Russia. Putin sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in February 2022, triggering full-scale war after 8 years of conflict in eastern Ukraine, between Ukrainian forces on one side and pro-Russian Ukrainians and Russian proxies on the other.